So hello again. I do a lot of traveling. In fact, travel photography is the main thing that I do with my cameras. So I thought, well, why not start doing these reviews actually on location while I'm traveling? So welcome back to my channel, welcome to Prague, and welcome to my Panasonic S5 Mark II review. Let's get into it. So the S5 Mark II was released back in January 2023, which means it's been out for 12 months or so by now. So by my standards, this is still a very early review. I already reviewed the Mark I earlier this year, and I liked nearly everything about that camera. It was my number one recommendation for anyone looking for travel pictures, better travel pictures than what they can get from their phone, but for not a lot of money. I also talked a lot about this 20 to 60 millimeter kit lens, and this is still the same one that I had. I kept this when I traded in my S5 Mark I, and it's still my main travel lens due to its exceptionally useful focal range, its sharpness, and its lightweight. So on paper, the Mark II is basically identical to the Mark I, except for one major change, and that is the addition of phase detect autofocus. There have also been a few improvements to the body, which I'll go into next, but not all of the changes have been positive, and there's a few in particular that I will talk about later on. One of them is potentially a deal breaker for me if it hasn't been fixed. So let's first talk about the great things about this camera that they didn't change. And the first thing is the size and weight. Now, I'm not sure if this is exactly the same size and weight as the Mark I, but what I'm trying to say is it feels exactly the same to me, and I think that's what's most important. They've made some changes to the mode dial, and they've included the high resolution mode there on the dial, which I think is really important because, well, first of all, just having a dial itself already sets this camera apart from most other cameras that don't have a drive mode dial, because I think that's one of the most important controls on any camera. But with a dedicated position on the mode dial, you can very quickly go from high resolution mode to normal mode, and that's particularly important because now they've added handheld high res mode. You can really go quickly between the modes on the fly when you're walking around the city taking pictures. There's also been a change to the thumb dial location. They've moved it a bit further back in order to accommodate the new strap mounts, which are an excellent improvement. On the right hand side, they've gotten rid of the metal nub which always dug into my palm, and they've put a nice little loop now, little metal loop there, which holds this strap really nicely. Unfortunately, on the other side, they just stuck a piece of metal on the side of the camera, which isn't that great, but I guess with the mode dial there, they just didn't have the room. That's a little pity, but it's still better than the way it was before. We retain the same high quality viewfinder and flippy screen, also super important to me. We have the same triple control dials, front, thumb, and dial pad on the back, so you can control every aspect of the exposure triangle. I use the front one for my shutter speed, the thumb for my aperture, and the rear one for the ISO. So I have full manual control of my settings at all times. And how I take pictures most of the time is using aperture priority mode and auto ISO. They've also kept these three buttons on the front by the shutter. And I think these are one of the best things about this camera because it gives you quick access to the most used controls that you need to use on the fly. So you've got white balance, ISO, and exposure. So those are about the only physical changes that they have made to this camera. They have kept everything that was good about it, and they've made a few tiny improvements. Okay, so these babies are hilarious, as you can see, but I just want to talk to you quickly about the lens that comes with the S5 Mark II. It's the 20 to 60, and it's the same lens that came with the S5 Mark I. In fact, this is my lens from the S5 Mark I. When I traded that in, I held on to the lens because this is an amazing lens for travel. The range, 20 to 60, is perfect for getting all these wide shots and buildings when you can't really step back too far, 20 millimeter. and the 60mm is good enough for when you want to take portraits or get some close-ups. I've talked about this lens in greater detail in my review of the S5 Mark 1, so if you want to know more about that, I'd advise that you go check that out. So I'll leave these babies to it. So let's talk now about the photo quality coming out of the S5 Mark II. There isn't much to say really, except that it's exactly the same as the photos from the S5 Mark I, and that means that you're going to get excellent dynamic range. I really like the colors coming out of this camera. It's probably the best images that I've seen from any full frame camera on the market right now. Also, Panasonic has now enabled the addition of real-time LUTs. So instead of adding LUTs to video that people are familiar with, you can now add LUTs to your stills. Now I have a load of LUTs because I have spent a few years now using Affinity Photo. So I have a load of LUTs that I've made, and when going on a trip you can just pick a LUT that you think is the look that you're trying to capture, like you're trying to capture the feel of a particular place, whether it's like cool, warm, dark, and so on, and you can just apply it to the photo as you're taking it. Now, can't you just do that in post? Yeah, of course you can, but when you're having a real-time view of it on the back of your camera, you can adjust your exposure properly, and if afterwards you actually don't like the look, you still have the raw image that you can edit as you would usually. But I find that is a real time saver. Like, I shot a wedding a couple months ago and I used a LUT and I had to do no post-processing whatsoever, and that saved an unimaginable amount of time. So on this trip I've used a kind of fake Velvia, Fuji Velvia LUT, which I found on the internet. So that's what I've been using for this trip. I'll put up a few pictures of the LUT modified file and the raw file so you can see the changes that have happened because of this LUT. But I find that's a really good feature to have. So I want to talk about updates, because updates is one thing that most mainstream reviewers don't talk about when they review cameras. That's because they would like get a camera, have it for about 2 weeks, talk about it, and then send it back. You really need to depend on people like me or people like you to buy this camera and have it for a certain amount of time before we can start talking about updates. Now, I remember having two Sony cameras. I had the A7R and I had the A7 III. And after buying those things, I never got any updates at all. No improvements whatsoever. Since I've got the Panasonic S5 Mark II, I've had like 3 updates already. The first one fixed a couple of very obvious bugs. The second and third ones though actually added features. So they've added handheld high resolution mode, which is super useful, and they've also added the LC mode, the light capture mode, I think it is. Now, granted, that was in the S5 Mark I, so we would expect it to come to the S5 Mark II. But the fact is that they added it in later on. Now, the latest update was about a week ago, and they have promised to fix one of the bugs which I've had with this camera ever since I bought it. And I'm really hoping that they did that, because it is a major bug, and I will talk about that some more later on. Okay, I've kept you in suspense for long enough. I need to tell you about the one reason that I may have to sell this camera and buy something else, because it's a big one, and that is the stability. Now, ever since I got it, it's been taking a really long time to turn on, and every now and then it would hang, it would crash, it would freeze, and I'd have to pop the battery out in order to get it to start again. And it's happened to me in the middle of photo shoots, and it's definitely not something that a professional photographer would be able to deal with. Now, I'm hoping that the latest firmware update fixes that, because they do promise stability updates. But I've had this for 9 months, and if the firmware doesn't fix it, I'm really have to start considering changing systems. And that could be quite expensive, because I've already bought quite a few L-mount lenses. Of course, there could be something wrong with this particular camera as well, so right after I do this review, I will contact Panasonic to see if there's a problem with this camera. Once it actually destroyed an SD card because it froze, and when I popped the SD card out, that SD card never worked in any device again after that, and that was a 128 gigabyte SD card, so already money lost. So at the end of this review, I will put some videos of the freezing, which I happen to take, so you can have a look at those. But definitely a deal breaker for me if this problem can't be solved, sadly. I just wanted to add that I never had any of this problem with my S5 Mark 1. That thing was fast, focused quickly, never corrupted any cards, and just worked flawlessly from the day I got it to the day I traded it in. It's kind of unfortunate that after all this time, Panasonic still only makes one camera body really, the other two being totally outdated. Well, the other three being outdated now. So if I have an issue with this body, I don't really have a choice to stay in this system. I need to go with a different system altogether. Hello, this is Lena. We're having some good check beer, and I just wanted to say who this camera is for. So the biggest upgrade on this camera compared to the Mark 1 is the phase detect autofocus. Now that makes it very useful for video. So if you do a lot of video shooting like I do, then perhaps the Mark 2 is a better one to buy. However, the Mark 2 is slower and not as good for photography as the Mark 1 was. So if you're primarily doing photography, then I recommend you save the money and get yourself the Mark 1. It's going to be a better camera for you. Yeah, you agree? Cool. So that's going to be it from me from Prague. Thanks for watching, and I'll leave you now with a compilation of the camera freezes which I encountered over the last couple of months, and I happened to catch on camera, and I recorded them as they happen. So yeah, like and subscribe for updates, and that's it. Bye for now.
Tu sais que ils effacent les personnes bah oui, parce qu'ils ont même les couleurs, ils mettent le turquoise, t'arrives en fait le marqué. Et c'était un vrai sujet
Where to Alhambra? Yeah, probably because of the crowd.
So keep recording the camera. I need to show that it's not responding. Red light again. Will it turn off? No, it won't even turn off. Pop the battery out. Yes, but did it? Wow, it didn't save anything since that. Okay. But where's the one I just... Right, nothing since then. So everything I took there is gone. So
Well, at least that's
Yeah.
the best time to have
can
this
see
happen.
that
If it's
it's
still
on.
within the
yeah, it's within
the
warranty,
that's perfect.
and it's completely unresponsive. It's not even turning off. So I'm gonna have to. I'm gonna have to pop the battery out. You wanna go on that side?
That's fine.
Cool. Now I hope I don't lose the last couple of shots that I've taken.
Oh, no.
That's what happens
Okay.
sometimes. Oh, sorry.
Sorry.
Right, so it's
It's
back,
alive now. Okay.
back on. Let's make sure we got.
Yeah.
Yeah, good.
Okay.
So it didn't delete, which is awesome.
Okay. Yeah.